till 5, till the end.
Till 20 minutes anyway, Deputy.
Garmagat, Ceann Comhairle. Every time a speaker has contributed here today, and it's been said many times, it's a historic day, I just couldn't help but grin every time, because each time it was said, it means so much. It is a long road that has no turning. There are many people in here that never thought that we would get here. We're on the cusp of legislating for free, for safe, for legal bodily autonomy and health care that puts women at its centre and not on the margins like a forgotten and irrelevant host. Along the journey to today, there have been moments that shook this nation and sent waves of emotion across the country. The bitterness and misogyny that led to the 8th Amendment being enshrined in our Constitution may be a distant memory for some, and yet there are so many echoes of it every day in our policies, in our hospitals and in our legislation. We must be careful not to repeat these mistakes, and where possible, always try and remember what we are trying to achieve in here. I fundamentally believe that we are trying to make people's lives better. Today, I believe we will make people's lives better. No doubt many of us have had our inboxes flooded with emails in recent weeks. I know mine has been. I've been told what people actually voted for. I've been told what people really wanted to vote for when they voted yes. And fair play to those people contacting me, because if they can look inside their hearts and know what the Irish people are thinking, they may have more in common with our forebearers than we know. So we shouldn't presume to know why people voted yes in such enormous numbers. We can only assume that, like the Together for Yes slogan, their private decision in the privacy of the ballot box needed public support, and they certainly received that. To those of you who voted yes, I thank you. We have to deliver the best piece of legislation possible now to honour that yes vote, that resounding yes vote. We have to let the clinical experts, the doctors and the women involved have the latitude and independence to act in the way that they see fit. The chill over medics must be lifted. The isolation, fear and power over women must be lifted too. What comfort can someone take from placing barriers in the way of either doctors or their patients? What sort of individual would take a twisted sense of achievement that once sufficient hoops had been jumped through and certain hurdles cleared and certain criteria adhered to, that maybe then, just maybe, a woman might be able to make a choice for herself? If the idea is that barriers might give people comfort, then we should think, what people are we trying to comfort? Who actually is the most deserving of comfort? A mass of people that we speculate upon existing, or actual physical, visible and credible women, girls or children in need of comfort, standing in front of a doctor, be it in Tralee, be it in Tullamore or be it in Terranure? Because in Kerry over 58% voted yes, in Offaly over 58% voted yes, and in my constituency of Dublin Bay South over 78% of people voted yes. Why and how they did that is their own business, but we would do a great disservice to them if we delayed and depart from that which was pledged. There is a great insight in Hamlet, where he says that the actions that should be carried out swiftly get delayed so much that they stop being actions at all. I could probably listen to it a few times in here, basically on a daily basis. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickled o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with disregard their current turns awry and lose the name of action. That's the thing about conscience. We're all supposed to have one, but some people deem theirs much more valuable than others. I've been dealing with this issue for almost 9 years. And when I started off based on my own personal experience, and I started within my own party discussing it, and in wider society, there was an attitude of, we've been there before, no one wants this, the public have no appetite for this. And then when we started discussing it in here, I listened to many conversations about, oh no, it's a Dublin issue. It's not relevant outside Dublin. And then we saw the map of Ireland with all of the women that leave every county in Ireland every year. And it was in front of us that it wasn't just a Dublin issue. And we had representatives who made assumptions based on the voices in their own echo chamber, their own people telling them what way people were thinking. And we have to, and Deputy Thomas Byrne referred to it, the gap between in here and out there. And the fact that we needed to employ or engage a citizens' assembly to bridge that gap between in here and out there, I think we really have to consider it, and I think the electorate needs to be very conscious of the fact that in here doesn't necessarily represent what's out there. I met people throughout the country, and one of the most significant engagements I had was up in Donegal. And myself and Dr. Peter Boylan drove to Donegal and we launched the Together for Yes campaign. And I looked down a room and I saw 400 or 500 people, and there was only one politician showing leadership in the room, and they weren't from my party. Thomas Pringle led the charge in Donegal for Together for Yes, when it wasn't perhaps a popular thing to do. And it was very difficult for politicians in Donegal because it was the way the vote fell in the end. But it's, I suppose, interesting how polls seem to have changed people's views more than perhaps evidence did. And I remember meeting people in Tipperary, more senior men, and I would have assumed when they approached me and mentioned the Eighth Amendment that I was going to get an earful. And I sat with many of them, and this is over a year ago, and I sat with many older men, and they told me how they hadn't really thought about the women when they were young men that went missing. They just blocked it out. They never considered the girl that was in their class who didn't turn up the next week and she disappeared. They never considered why their sister went away to England for 6 months. They never considered any of that which they accepted as truth as they grew up. They never considered that that was probably a woman that was in difficulty, and Ireland dealt with it in Ireland's way, the way we did then. But this is now, and it's a fair departure from 2013, but we are now in a position where, due to probably largely the political makeup in here, that we were able to come together, those of us who were dedicated to righting this wrong and removing the Eighth Amendment, that we were able to work together on a cross-party committee and come up with such a comprehensive report. And that report didn't just land out of the sky. That report came from hours and hours of work, dedication by many members of all parties and none. And we worked together and we trusted each other to have the same purpose at the end, and we worked together to get to the end. We're now in a position where we want to roll out these services, and the Minister mentioned the other day the amount of women that have had to travel from this country since the electorate resoundingly voted for yes. And it is our duty now as legislators to enact the will of the people and to stop doing what we were doing before, torturing women, treating them in a cruel, inhumane and degrading manner in their hour of need. We still have one woman a week having a diagnosis of a fatal fetal abnormality, having to travel in the most difficult of circumstances. And I welcome the Minister's comments earlier about the provision of medical records to hospitals abroad. And I remember the lady that Deputy Catherine Murphy referred to earlier on. Some of the evidence we heard at the committee was deeply disturbing. To have a psychiatrist have to refer a patient abroad and send them off without their medical records is just cruel. And that professor said she lay awake at night worrying about the welfare of those patients. So hopefully come the new year, we will start the process of dealing with women's health in a mature and rational fashion in this country. I agree with many of the speakers today that there are issues with the bill. Some of the language is not ideal. I completely agree with this changing pregnant woman to pregnant person for inclusivity, and also the front-loading of the criminality on the bill. The front-loading of criminality on the bill brings a negative. There could be an ordering, a change in ordering there. We also have to make sure that everyone is catered for, and we don't want a situation where women in the most isolated parts of our country aren't able to get timely, comprehensive health care. There has to be a proper standard throughout this country. And I know Deputy Smith earlier spoke about other health practitioners being involved in this. It is my considered opinion that this has to be led by GPs. And doctors. It was the will of the committee, and the expert evidence suggested that that should be the case. Perhaps in time there may be an opening for that, but at the moment I would disagree that midwives or pharmacists should be involved in the dispensing or in the prescribing and administration of which was called the abortion pills. We have to make sure that our sonography services in this country are widely available, not just in Dublin, but outside Dublin, so that when people get their diagnosis, that if it's a bad diagnosis at their 20-week scan, that there's no ambiguity, that they don't have to be moved to another centre and to another centre to repeat the trauma of a bad start. Bizarre and all as it seems, if we just have the principle that women should be at the centre of this and nobody else, I think we're probably on a good path. And while we've managed to repeal the 8th Amendment, and while we're in a new dawn, I think it's probably coming down the tracks the negative effects that the 8th Amendment has had on our society and on families. And the amount of stories that many of us that have been engaged in this have heard about the missing sister or the long-lost nephew and all of these hidden people and the shame in families. And I spoke here before, and I'd say it again, I often speak to my mother about, she's 70 years of age, and about the crime it was to have a child. and that having a baby was seen as the worst thing that could happen to you when you were unmarried. And really, when we think about that, isn't it just the most awful thing that you would think that the worst thing that could happen to you in your life is having a baby? Because for most of us, it's the happiest time of our life. And I think we have to think of the knock-on psychological effects on that whole generation who were fed a diet of hellfire, damnation, and been preached to about their personal lives from the altar. And that I do think it's going to take a couple of generations to wash the stains of all of that out of our history. There's a few people that need great thanks here today. Alba Smith, who has fought for this for most of her life. The Together for Yes campaign, who got it together, somehow managed to get people from all sides of the political divide to canvass together. I doubt in my lifetime I will ever canvass again where I have somebody from People Before Profit shouting at me on what road I should canvass. But it was a once-off, and I think it was worth it. To the medical experts, many of whom largely give their time voluntarily, and to the medical experts who voluntarily attended our public meetings, both in a Fine Gael perspective but also Together for Yes, who accompanied me around the country, many of whom had worked a long day being a GP or a hospital doctor, and they were able to get into their car and come down and take questions in Louth or in Meath or in Tipperary or whatever part of the country we were in. And those people are the people that have driven this, the medical profession as well as the activists. And those women who told their stories to many people within my party, the women and men who had a diagnosis of a fatal fetal abnormality. I think that's what changed it for many people within my party, the barbaric nature in which we were treating people. And it does seem like a made-up story if you told somebody that in a medical crisis that you had to book a flight or get on the boat and go to a foreign city and deal with a health system that you're not used to, and to bring the ashes of your much-wanted child home in the boot of your car. It does actually seem like a made-up story. And in time, I'm sure the generations ahead of us will wonder what we were at and how we allowed this happen in our country. I welcome the fact that this is to be a universal provision. We heard huge evidence that any barrier to access, despite someone's means on paper, and they may not actually have the means to have a termination of pregnancy where they want it, when they want it. Tribute has to be paid to Minister Simon Harris, who has listened and learned and been compassionate and understanding and listened to the experts and helped us to get to where we are today. And to the members of Fianna Fáil, I know Deputy Donnelly now is spokesperson on health, but Deputy Kelleher was the main man on the committee, and Lisa Chambers, and I thank them for sticking with us. And to Sinn Féin, who sat down with me and we worked through wordings, and we teased out how we could get to the end with the outcome that we wanted. So I'm anxious for this to start in January, but it's very important that this is done right, that we don't have any errors, that we don't leave anybody out in the cold, that the system that we put in place is fit for purpose. And I'm not going to fall out with the Minister over a week or two or a month or two, but I think it is important that this is done right, because to have confidence in your health system and to have confidence that you will get the proper care and that you're not just a trial run is very important, because for the woman and the family at the centre, they expect the very best. With regard to the amendments, I do firmly believe that that which we put to the people is that which we should be passing in here. And I think Deputy Donnelly put it very well earlier. Unless it's something within the heads, I think we'd be very careful about the discrepancy between what we said we'd do and what we're doing. We need to make sure it's as aligned as possible, because the Irish people want to be able to trust their politicians. So on this historic day, after 20 minutes, I think, of keeping going, I thank all my colleagues. I thank my colleagues in Fine Gael, and I thank the people of Ireland for doing what I thought they'd do all along. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.